Harry Potter and the nation-state. Are witches and wizards citizens of the nation-state? That is the question I've been asking ever since I stumbled upon a bunch of YouTube shorts talking about realism and Harry Potter. The simple answer is yes. Harry lives in magical Britain, which implies that at least the borders of the magical nation and the nation-state are the same. All magical activity within Britain is controlled by the Ministry of Magic. By definition, a ministry is part of a government, so presumably, that's the British government. When I read the books, I thought the ministries were beholden to the International Confederation of Wizards, but apparently that's like the United Nations. Even in fiction, the UN sucks at stopping wars. Anyway, aside from definitions and borders, why do I think the ministry is part of the British government and not independent? Well, I have three pieces of evidence. Firstly, their secret base is located underneath and accessed from the UK government, specifically the Treasury Building and Whitehall. Secondly, the Minister of Magic reports to the British Prime Minister during emergencies, via a portrait of the first Minister of Magic. The first report was about Sirius Black's escape, the second was about the attack on the Quidditch World Cup, the third was about the Azkaban breakout, and the final time was about the Muggle deaths during the war against Voldemort. Thirdly, the ministry was founded in 1701 and replaced the Wizards' Council, which we know was a governing body in its own right because the Wizengamot, the magical court and parliament, moved from the council to the ministry and diminished in power. So in summary, the Wizards were independent until 1701, when the first Minister of Magic connected them to the British government. Open and shut case. Magical folk are citizens of the nation-state. But that leads to another question. Why would the ancient and noble houses subject themselves to the power and presumably authority of the non-magical world? Even in the modern age, with all the technological and societal development the Muggles demonstrate, the ancient houses still look down on them. If you view it from their perspective, they can rewind time, make themselves virtually immortal, teleport, and kill without leaving a mark. Subjecting themselves to the authority of a Muggle government is equivalent to the US with its 8,000 plus nuclear weapons becoming the police force of Denmark. I have a theory, one of many in this video, about how the Ministry of Magic likely came to be. When Hogwarts was founded, then Muggleborns started being properly trained. Slytherin and the other noble houses rejected this because they're supremacists. However, there might be another motivation for why they wanted it stopped. Hogwarts is a castle defended by knights with heraldry and a headmaster who looks more like a king on his throne in the Great Hall. Hell, they even have dungeons. There's enough evidence to suspect that magical society was feudal, just like Muggle society was at the time when Hogwarts was founded in the 10th century. And if it was, then empowering and enfranchising Muggleborns would have been fine. For the moment. Muggle society is always advancing, and because Muggleborns are by their nature randomly placed within Muggle society, then the magical society was committing itself to the constant importation of ideas of progress. Ideas like the end of feudalism, the rise of the nation-state, and the promotion of rights and responsibilities. This timeline explains the creation of the ministry in 1701 as well. The Treaty of Westphalia was signed in 1648, Britain briefly killed its king and became a republic between 1649 to 1660, and the French Revolution started in 1789. These events would have shaped the Muggles' opinion of what a government should be. The ministry appears right in the middle, and its structure reflects how half-baked it is. It's more likely than not that the half-bloods and the Muggleborns modernized their society and subjugated it to the nation they were truly loyal to. The nation with all their Muggle friends and family, who seemed more enlightened than the feudal witches and wizards they had to deal with. This fits with the lore too. According to the wiki, the wizards created the ministry after the witch hunts in the 17th century got so bad that they needed the protection of the crown. I don't think that's wrong, I just think that's propaganda created by the ministry to obscure the full story. There's no way that the Muggles could have beaten the wizards at that point in time. The wizards were simply too powerful and coordinated. If my theory is correct, then the Muggleborns were working with Muggles to destroy or subsume a rogue state within their borders. The reason the Wizards' Council became the ministry was because the Muggleborns and the Muggle nation-state were more powerful than them. The only problem with this theory is that the Muggleborns and Half-Bloods aren't the dominant political class in the present day. There are a few possibilities for why this is. Firstly, they were slowly replaced by the ancient houses, who don't shy from nepotism. Secondly, they had to enter a power-sharing agreement with the ancient houses to avoid or end a civil war. Or thirdly, they are still in power and the perspective we see in the series is incorrect. This would mean that the purebloods are freaking out and aligning with Voldemort not only because they are supremacists, but also because they know their power is waning. Doubly so after Voldemort failed the first time round and killed most of their faction, emptied their coffers, and likely prompted structural change which adversely affected them. All the options are plausible, and none of them make a huge difference to how I answer my original question. Witches and wizards are citizens of the nation-state, and we can guess at how that came to be. But what does it mean to be a citizen of the nation-state? According to Wikipedia, citizenship confers rights but also responsibilities. The rights part is simple. Witches and wizards can probably vote twice, once for the Minister of Magic and any subordinate and democratic positions, and twice in the national elections for the Muggle government, assuming the Ministry of Magic is democratic and not an explicit or de facto oligarchy. The responsibilities part is complicated. Do witches and wizards just obey magical law, or do they obey Muggle law as well? My guess is they obey both. This complicates things because I'm pretty sure all magical law would be considered regulations, as they're produced by a ministry and not authorized by the Parliament. Unless of course the Parliament created a secret document empowering the ministry to create separate laws, which would be a big secession of sovereignty. However, it would have precedent. It would be similar to the Statute of Westminster, which gave Commonwealth countries the power to make their own laws, and limited Parliament's powers to only make laws for Commonwealth countries at their request. Let's assume something like that happens and the ministry hasn't gone off the reserve and exceeded their authority. What happens when there's a conflict between magical and Muggle law? The magical society does seem more archaic, so it's likely they're behind on social issues. If a witch was not allowed to marry a Muggle in Fantastic Beasts, what else might be on their books? And what happens if the Muggle society bans something that was previously tolerated in Wizarding society? For example, I don't know, slavery. That's an interesting piece of social commentary that's buried in the existing story. The Muggleborns are aware of, and for the most part, tolerate the enslavement of the House Elves, with rare exception. The Muggle Prime Minister would also be briefed on the scope and scale of the magical world, and since he has authority over them, we can assume he tacitly accepts the status quo as well. There's no evidence to suggest that the Muggle government did anything to end slavery, and the unfair treatment of other peoples in magical society. It's possible they tried and could not force the ministry to end slavery. Short of a civil war, they knew they'd lose. I can picture the newly appointed Prime Minister arriving at number 10, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, hoping to make a difference, and then finding out there's a slave state within his borders and Darby is picking cotton. When I started this video, I had different ideas on where it would go. What about the other laws, the ones that are obviously going to be issues? How many Hogwarts students took divination and then immediately went out to win the lottery? Is there a law preventing them from participating in the lottery, or a method making it immune to divination? Maybe they're allowed to win as much as they want, but they can never convert it to the magical world's currency of choice. That would protect their economy and mess with the Muggle one. The ancient houses seem to possess most of the wealth, so this type of law would serve their interests in multiple ways. Another obvious issue is the number of cases involving the mistreatment of Muggles. This has to be the most common offense by far. Aurors would not be fighting dark wizards, they'd be cleaning up the messes left by Muggleborns and half-bloods re-entering society with the power of God at their fingertips. Blowing up bullies, bosses, and bad drivers is the least of the ministry's concerns. These are fighting-age people that, if not strictly monitored, would likely cause a staggering amount of change or outright destruction. If someone you know was given the power of a god, would they sit on their hands? Imagine a Muggleborn does that, and their family knew. They'd never be able to look at them the same way, knowing that they could improve the world, or at least their lives, and were choosing not to. On to the final issue, the biggest responsibility that witches and wizards would have as citizens of the nation-state. Can they be conscripted? The ancient and noble houses wouldn't. There's no chance they'd expend their limited numbers to fight and die in a Muggle war. The half-bloods and Muggleborns might though, either out of nationalistic loyalty or because they know other members of their family would have to fight in and face the consequences of war. So on the one hand you have wizards dodging the draft, and on the other wizards storming the beaches, which is kinda awesome. A magical D-Day, a magical Vietnam, a magical Guantanamo Bay. Oh wait, no, that's horrifying, and not dissimilar to what's depicted. We can probably assume that some half-blood and Muggle-born witches and wizards do fight in the wars. Whether they're conscripted or barred from fighting to limit the damage makes little difference because it will happen. The scale of the involvement would be geopolitical. If one nation-state was magical and the other was not, it's simple. The magical nation-state wins. If the magical society spanned both nation-states, then involvement would be small and spread out over both sides. If both nation-states have their own distinct magical societies, their own ministries, then things get messy. If the ancient houses get their way, they can both stay out of it. There'll be low-level involvement and probably escalation, but this can be solved through negotiation. According to the wiki, this is what happened during the American Revolution. It would be very similar to the Cold War with lots of tension, but ultimately no direct confrontation that would end the world as they know it. As soon as a magical war happens, then magical society would change though. National security would become their chief concern. Even if magical Britain didn't imperious rival governments or strengthen their own government, other states might. They'd need a division of the ministry dedicated to monitoring high-level Muggle government officers to prevent them being controlled by enemies. Assuming, of course, the Muggles didn't establish MI666 to investigate and protect against their own ministry and any others. There is at least one geopolitical question which was definitively answered regarding magical warfare. Does the magical international community police rogue states? No, absolutely not. Voldemort almost conquered magical Britain twice, and both times the other ministries across the world stayed silent. I'm not sure how to feel about that. On the one hand, we're spared from magical Iraq, but on the other, there must be a lot of terrible stuff going on. Yet, I'm puzzled by this isolationism or rigid sovereignty, because globalization should have developed faster in the magical world. They have instantaneous transportation, presumably instantaneous translation, and trade based on magical creatures, ingredients, woods, and more, which seem very region-specific. Almost every potion is likely the product of an interdependent international magical market. And Jesus Christ. However, it seems they're still limited to radio, so the cultural exchange through TV or social media might be much more limited. So the magical world's globalization is more like the 19th centuries and not the 2000s. Oh, and I forgot to mention, this is all presuming the Ministry of Magic is allowed to maintain an independent foreign policy. By some definitions, this might distinguish them as a political actor from the nation-state, and complicate things even more. I'm going to assume they are still within the nation-state, but that the international concerns of the Muggles aren't so pressing that they demand unity. I doubt there's a magical Brexit, for instance, since we've seen no evidence of a magical EU, at least in terms of security. Anyway, I'm getting off track. The geopolitics of Harry Potter is interesting, but ultimately very inconsequential. The two more important issues concerning the nation-state are probably the role of goblins in magical society and the imminent threat of revolution. I'll tackle the goblin issue first, since it's easier. Why do the goblins follow the Ministry's rules about not associating with Muggles? They're renowned inventors and bankers with a love of architecture. They would probably get along great with Muggles. Beyond that simple affection, though, there are incentives to working together. The Goblin rebellions weren't super effective, but if they're greatest inventors paired with some Muggle weapon developers, like Boeing, I think the tide of battle might change. A Goblin-made Gatling gun would be a terrific weapon. The Goblins could even make these deals in secret. They have huge reserves of Muggle currency because Muggleborns and Half-Bloods convert it to galleons. What else are they going to spend that money on? GameStop stocks? The Goblins could also break the rules because of Muggle societal development. There's bound to be one Goblin or House Elf that's watching the end of colonialism and the expansion of human rights and going, "Hey, wait a minute, elves shouldn't be slaves and we deserve rights." As a shocking coincidence, the Goblin rebellions were supposedly between the 16th century and the 19th century, which coincides with the struggle to abolish slavery. Let's assume that for whatever reason, all their attempts to work with humans failed and they've given up on that. Why haven't the Goblins used their stranglehold on the entire magical economy for anything? I could totally imagine a bill being proposed in the Ministry to give Goblins extra rights, a bill supported by the Goblin lobby. And when it gets rejected, they pull the plug on the economy. I'd even contend there's some evidence of political manipulation in the conversion rate. Remember what I asked what the Goblins were spending their Muggle money on? Well, there is an official answer. According to the author, the Goblins just put the money back into circulation. But that doesn't make much sense. Goblins don't strike me as the sort to voluntarily part with value and to give people free money. But they don't give people free money, I hear you say. But yes, they do. If they're exchanging Muggle money for galleons and then returning the Muggle money into circulation, they're generating galleons from nothing. That's fine if they meant the money, but if that's a ministry responsibility, which I hope it is, either they're withdrawing the money from a ministry fund designed for this purpose, or they're giving away money for free to the Muggleborns. Why would they do this? Well, I think they're intentionally devaluing the wizarding currency and shifting the financial power from the ancient houses to the Muggleborns. This accomplishes two distinct goals for the goblins. Firstly, impoverishing the ancient enemies, who might then sell goblin treasures back to the bank, and secondly, empowering the muggles who might grant them more rights and freedoms akin to those in the muggle society. If this is the goblins' plan, they likely don't understand the forces they're playing with. Which brings me to my final theory, that the wizarding world is on the verge of revolution. Most of the political power was held by a small group of ancient families, through likely hereditary or nepotistic institutions. This isn't great, and their fringe is definitely a serious threat, but they evidently support the status quo. There's little to fear from them so long as the radicals are routinely defeated. Rather, we should be fearing the Muggleborns and Half-Bloods who are more accustomed to representative governments and who are following a century where dictators fell. Harry Potter entered Hogwarts 2 years after the fall of the Berlin Wall, and the same year the Soviet Union dissolved. And a more peaceful revolution like that of the Civil Rights Movement are probably more idealistic. This is an archaic society, no Geneva Convention to protect people. Mind control, torture, and all manner of other horrifying things would be on the table. It'd be closer to the French Revolution, or the Russian Revolution. Arguably, that's what we saw depicted in the movies, a coalition of Muggleborns, Half-Bloods, and a few ancient houses toppling the old regime, and the supremacists trying to radicalize it. It's ridiculous to imagine the Coalition of Progress rebuilding the old regime with all its outdated policies and changing it slowly over multiple generations. They won the Civil War. The nation is theirs to shape. And we can say with certainty that there will be tremendous opposition to their attempts to reshape an archaic society, not least of which coming from the other ministries across the world which aren't as progressive. Wizarding Metternich is inevitable. The revolution might climax intentionally or unintentionally with the end of the Statute of Secrecy and the melding of magical and non-magical society. And that kind of brings me to the conclusion of this video. Are witches and wizards citizens of the nation-state? Yes. It started with Hogwarts accepting Muggleborns, it was supported by multiple elements of magical society acting in their own self-interest, and it was reaffirmed by the victory at the Battle of Hogwarts. Making this video felt like a fever dream. It was fun to think about how crazy Harry Potter might be, but I might watch a different movie tonight. I hope you enjoyed going down this rabbit hole with me, and thank you for watching. I just realized that if hereditary magic was revealed to the public, it'd be a lot of eugenics. I mean, who wouldn't want their children to be gods? Maybe the people that believe in God. Oh wait, not again.